everybody. This is Ben Charles with your episode 233 of the Percussion podcast. Today is May 10th, and this episode will be released on June 11th. With me, as always, are Karli.
Hey, everyone.
Ksenia Komjunovic.
Hey, everybody.
And Casey Cangelosi.
Hey, everybody.
I just wanted to start by making a quick mention of an item that was in the news that probably everyone saw, but that is that Little Richard, who is considered the architect of rock and roll, has passed away. So that's some sad news. I did not know this about Little Richard. I saw today that actually Jimi Hendrix played in Little Richard's band before Jimi Hendrix was Jimi Hendrix that we know today. And apparently Jimi Hendrix got in trouble for upstaging Little Richard and kind of stealing the show, which you're not supposed to do when you play with Little Richard. So Little Richard had to dim the lights for the band so that they could only see him. So some fun fact. Yeah.
And that's why Jimi Hendrix moved to London, because he was like, I can't do this anymore.
Can't deal with this guy anymore. But yeah. But anyway, Casey, what happened in history today?
Sure. A couple of first performances. First one in 1960, Stockhausen's Contact A piece, which we've talked about several times. What is it? Piano, percussion, and electronics, right? Yeah. And Britain's Midsummer Night's Dream, the little opera. I don't know if y'all ever played or heard that one, but I got to play that once also in 1960. That was premiered on release date, which is June 11th. Also, it's Richard Strauss's birthday, so Garrett gets to be now tied in forever with all those cool events and also not so cool events. And I'm just going to start reading from a New York Times article, and you all can tell me what you think this event was. So this just says the archive in building 6197 was Universal Music Group's main West Coast storehouse of masters, the original recordings from which all subsequent copies are derived. A master is a one-of-a-kind artifact, the irreplaceable primary source of a piece of recorded music. According to UMG documents, the vault held analog tape masters dating back as far as the late 1940s, as well as digital masters of more recent vintage. Anybody have a guess at what this story might be just after hearing that? Oh, I thought I said it before we started.
Yeah,
you did.
I was gonna say, I'm guessing there was a fire, something like that.
There you go. Yeah, thank you. So the New York Times a year ago today revealed that in this great fire in 2008, the whole warehouse burnt down, about 500,000 song titles, including those from Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Bing Crosby, Ella Fitzgerald, Julie Garland, John Coltrane, Count Basie, Dizzy Gillespie, Max Roach, Art Blakey, Sonny Rollins, Charles Mingus. The list just goes on and on and on. But in 2008, the fire happened, and then they revealed and I think figured out all that they lost a year ago today, June 11th. So at the time, it was a big news story because there were so many original film reels lost. And so, of course, the public, I think, generally just knows much more about film than they do about music. Well, I don't know, that's probably not safe to say, but they publicized the loss of all the films really well. But Universal Music Group was renting, they rent storage spaces all over the world, and they had a huge pile of music there. So they lost all these masters recordings. And in the New York Times article, there is a really cool little chunk expressing just how different a master is, like the first final recording version, than all the copies we hear. So if you're listening to a Duke Ellington track on Spotify, well, as we know, that is like a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, and the sound quality does change. And if you ever want to do a remaster of an original, you would need that original, and they're gone, about 500,000 of them. So at the time when this happened, UMG said, oh, we suffered no loss from the fire, but they were either trying to just save face and not be embarrassed, or they truly didn't know everything they had lost yet. So anyway, that happened June 11th, 2008.
Yeah, that actually reminds me pretty intensely of, I remember it being in a lesson with Christopher Dean in my undergrad, and he talked about, he took an art history course, and he said in his art history course that he took in college, there would be a photograph of a painting, and it would say this painting was destroyed in the bombing of Dresden. And in World War II, the city of Dresden was just bombed for basically no strategic reason, just to show the American force. And yeah, there was all sorts of amazing art that was lost. So tragic.
Well, they made a parallel. Oh, sorry. They made a parallel saying, art has to be touched up. You have to maintain art. You have to take care of art. And if every time we make copies of recordings, we're not taking care of the original sound. So the further you get from the master, it's sort of similar to not touching up art. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I was gonna just add on that, like, we have insurance for art, but like, you really can't insure art. If the Mona Lisa burns down, it's gone. We can't replace it with any value. Luckily, with digital audio, that hopefully will be a thing of the past for musicians. The file will exist somewhere on a server, but yeah, interesting. Thanks for sharing, Casey.
Sure.
Well, our guest for today is Garrett Mendelow. Garrett, I could probably go on and on about Garrett, but I'll keep it short. Garrett's a Trump Percussion Competition laureate. He's premiered a double percussion concerto by Nico Muhly with Colin Curry. He's studied with Michael Udow, Pius Cheng, Eric Odaimo, Peter Permel, and many others. And he is especially known for his work with the music of Yanis Xenakis. So welcome to the podcast, Garrett.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you guys.
You studied with Pius? What do you mean? Like, why?
Perfect. I don't know, something to do.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Actually, when I was like 15 years old, I wanted to start getting serious with concert percussion. So I was slated to start studying with Michael Udow, and Michael went on a summer break to play with the Santa Fe Opera, as he was doing back then, because I grew up in Ann Arbor, where I went to school at the University of Michigan for my bachelor. And he said, "Oh, I won't be there this summer, but Eric Odaimo will." So I started taking lessons with Eriko, and when she finished her summer residency at U of M, Pius came in because he was going to start his doctorate. And so during high school, I think summer before my senior year, I started studying with Pius. I think our lessons were every other week, if not every 3 or 4 weeks. They were great. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know the story. Yeah, Michigan is the connection, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
It's definitely it was different though,
now.
going 1 year being his student and just being this high school guy to then for a year pretty much just being his colleague, like as a freshman.
Cool.
It's like the tone of argument and subject matter changed immensely. But still, I was always learning from Pius. Whether or not Casey wants to learn from him, I learned from him.
I mean, yeah, I've learned things from him, but
all bad and irrelevant.
I had a teacher tell me sometimes it's more important to learn what not to do, right, Casey? Yeah, Garrett, you're doing a masterclass on Xenakis. I think you said in a week, which this episode will be released after you've already done that. So we unfortunately can't help promote it. But can you tell us about what your thought was going into that masterclass, where the idea came from, and what you hope to get across during that masterclass?
So this is past tense, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's
So
the
the masterclass wasn't really about. I've gotten some criticism, of course, because when people assume I'm going to give a class on Rebonds, it's I have a spectacular couple of ways to play this, and you guys should be playing it this way. But the point of my masterclass was to give people options and to not be discouraged when confronting the music by Xenakis, because it can be intimidating, it's technically challenging, and there are a lot of even for people who have been playing Xenakis for years, there are still some very controversial moments in the music. He says a lot of things in his talks with Roger Reynolds, or online. There's this great conversation with him and two spokesmen from a German television program where he's talking about his music, and sometimes his ideas will conflict one another. But that just shows how humanistic he is, even though a lot of his music is born out of this challenging mathematical series of progressions, it's really humanistic on a huge level. So trying to bring some of that humanity into music that's so well calculated is something that I've always found interesting. And I don't pretend to be, and I wasn't, hopefully in the masterclass, I wasn't pretending to be a guru on the subject. But the whole point is, like with my general teaching, is I want to give my students options and not demands. And for Rebonds, I failed so many times with this piece. It would be unfair to not share my failures and the things I've experimented with. And so I could really help people. I think, you know, I was talking to one of my students who's in Italy right now. And the fascinating thing about the percussion repertoire is that younger and younger people are playing these very hard 20th century pieces. And I've talked with Stephen Schick about how this is our repertoire. These are the pieces that we're going to grow up, like 100 years later, that 5-year-olds are going to be preparing at their homes. You know, like just like people are preparing Beethoven or Bach on piano today. And that thought kind of scares you when you look at pieces like Xenakis or Fernie-Ho or James Wood, thinking that a 5-year-old's going to be able to play that someday. Well, you know, I'm teaching a 17-year-old right now how to play Rebonds, and they're just getting, you know, younger. So who knows?
Brace ourselves. The winter is coming.
I had something to add to that. I saw, Garrett, somewhere online you made a comment that like just struck me as absolutely fascinating. And I don't know if this is a question for me or just a comment, but I feel like the typical approach to Rebonds is, or Rebond, as you so beautifully say, is it's so, and like I'm as guilty of this as anyone. It's so bombastic, just like hard sticks, and like Rebonds A in particular, just like fires off fortissimo. And you said that like the interesting thing to you at this point was the sort of rhythmic complexity of the, like how the polyrhythms grit against each other, if you will. Was that something that you got from Steve Schick, or did that you come up with that on your own, or or am I making that up entirely?
No. So before my official
you did
post,
say that, right?
No, you're totally on. No, before my official post to advertise my masterclass, someone had posted on my Rebond video, which in my opinion isn't a fair representation of how I play Rebond right now. But he posted on the video, interesting, I've always thought that Xenakis should be, you know, bombastic, it should be brutal, it should be severe. And I was thinking, well, maybe Xenakis has liked performances like that, but it doesn't mean that all of his performances should be that way. And, you know, for me, I no longer play the piece in movements. Like I did one Dutch TV show a while back, and they could only have time for me to play Rebonds, the B movement, and that's fine because they were paying me to only play one movement. But if I given the choice, I always play the two together. They're really, it's one piece. It's like playing only one movement of the Tanaka 2 movements from marimba. You know, it's kind of like you can't have one without the other. And with Rebonds B, I actually find that there's like a more inherent groove that doesn't need to be brutal. It doesn't need to be severe. It doesn't need to try so hard. A lot of those moments, because they're not in triple, there aren't a lot of polyrhythms in B, there really is a lot of room to just kind of settle down. And then I end with A, where there's a lot of space, and I take my time to voice each rhythm. I give kind of each rhythm its own character. And then the piece kind of becomes more severe and more brutal. I mean, not until like the last 3 lines does it actually say fortissimo. And then I make it more like an end declamatory ritual. So I wait. I stretch that piece all the way. I don't care if the blocks are like only in B or whatever. I think the progression for me, I've always liked starting with B. Maybe some days I'll start with A. But starting with B is great because of the way I can pace the energy. And also, I don't have to get through 1.5 movements of Xenakis before I play the end of B. I can just get it out of the way and then have room to actually finish the piece. So, yeah.
I had a quick follow-up question and then a completely different direction. But one was I watched a performance of yours for their TV, and I was wondering the thing that you did so brilliantly with the stick, where you put extra heads on to get the drag.
Wait, let me go get it.
Do you have it? Let's see. On display. Can't steamroll me, Benjamin Charles. Sorry, Casey. I'll let you take over before.
I want to ask about BA or AB. I know Garrett does BA.
Just talked about that.
What do you mean?
Are you drunk?
No, but why? Like, what are the benefits?
Yeah,
of
he didn't
BA?
really.
I actually think I lost it.
Were you not listening?
I wasn't.
Unbelievable.
You lost it?
I think I lost it because I have something way better.
But
what is
why
it?
go AB versus BA? Like, I like to go BA.
I like to go BA too. High five.
Yeah, high five. But have you ever considered going the other way? Or I guess
I've
like,
done both.
yeah,
I
like
go
what
both
people
ways.
often ask is why one or the other? What are the benefits? Because you're talking about the overall arc and you like saving it, which I
Sure.
agree. I like saving it so that you get the end of B and then you arrive at A and it's this really satisfying moment. But so like that makes a lot of sense. What's the benefit of doing it the other way, for instance?
Well, so the benefit for me of doing B is a lot of people don't do this, and it's because maybe they use two setups. I am a fan of the Steven Schick one setup, don't waste drums kind of policy. And I've been creative kind of with my my setup, and I've made like a double-headed conga out of an African drum. I use 3 bongos like in Demothin because I like how a low bongo sounds when you tune it down. All that stuff. And then I also use this awesome 20-inch gong drum from Pearl, shameless plug, for my Rebonds bass drum 1. I love that I get more tone out of the first bass drum. But what's really cool about going B to A is both movements are specified to be attacca. And this can only be done either if you have the setups like physically back to back, or if you end with the block on the end of Rebond B, then you go right into the drum for A. And the way I show in my master class, what I do with the A setup is basically I have the B setup in the middle of the highest drum and the lowest drum that I add to the setup. So, because A is all about expansion, and B has less drums, though it has more instruments than A. But you hear how the drums have been expanded right from the first 2 lines of B, first 2 lines of A. So I really like this kind of going da 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 boom.
Yeah, cool.
And with if you end with A, just the kind of boom boom ba boom. You have to just kind of wait to go right into B.
That's cool. Yeah.
But I've done both. It really just kind of depends on how I feel during the concert. Sometimes on the program, I just kind of specify I don't know yet whether I'm going to do A or B. So yeah, it's kind of fun to surprise your audience sometimes. But yeah, about the mallet, because Xenia brought it up.
Yes, please. Thank you.
This is kind of the same shameless plug I did in my master class is, you know, I have these blocks that I made, right?
Mm-hmm. Whoa. That's really cool. You did that on your own.
What?
You did that on your own.
Yeah, patent pending.
Whoa, that's really cool.
Oh yeah.
So the hard part of the mallet is there's more weight in the center of the shaft. And though I only have to use it, you know, for that part, it's kind of hard to play the double stroke rolls when you've got the weight in the middle of the mallet because there's no give. So this way I can do the mandolin rolls with the 2 mallets, like in between the blocks, and then.
So real quick for anyone
that sounds awesome.
For anyone that's audio only listening, I just figured I'd explain what you were just hearing. So Garrett what has made a like a slat of wood, like, you know, a lot of people use like these slats instead of quote unquote wood blocks, like traditional, you know, percussion wood blocks. And then it has like at the end, it's almost like an M shape that he can drag the mallet to make that.
Really plugging the M, yeah.
I just figured for anyone that doesn't know, can't see, it might be helpful to have a description. So that's what it is.
The Mendelow roll.
And you can purchase these on GarrettMendelowWoodblocks.com.
That's cool. That's a great solution.
It is a great solution, but I was going to ask about the previous one that you used with the added heads on a mallet. Was that, where did you come up with that? Because I saw a few other people do that sort of around the same time, like 2014 it started popping up, but I was like, who was the source of this?
So yeah, as far as I know, there have only been like 3 occurrences, including mine. So what I did is I performed it like that at Stony Brook in 2013 for my master's recital. And there was no video or audio ever released of that. And then I came to Detmold. I did the piece 2 more times. Peter Prommel kept wanting me to play Rebonds. It was super funny. And a lot of my markings in my score are from Peter. And I was reading through it today and I was like, God, I got to call Peter. I miss him. But then the Tromp 2014 competition came along, and I had just played on the radio, on the television show. That's up, the Rebonds B, and you can see me playing with this mallet. And then Konstantin Napolov, who's a Ukrainian percussionist based in the Netherlands, he wrote, "Hey, I'm doing this too. Come see me play at the Tromp competition first round." And actually, he has a very interesting setup because instead of navigating these stacked blocks in back of me, because sometimes you can get your mallets or your sticks caught in between, he actually slats the blocks like I do, but he does it at an angle so he still plays alternating, which is a very interesting solution. I think it only becomes a problem when you have the mandolin roll because he had to keep coming up like this whenever he changed pitch. But yeah, he did it, and then Resta started making the glissando mallet.
Did they? They're smart businessmen.
Yeah, and I don't think it's actually specifically for Rebonds B. I think it might be for some other things. I don't know of any other things to use it for, but I'm sure there are. I mean, it's percussion. It's a wide world of new possibilities. But I think they have that product for sale now. Yeah,
I was just going to add that if you ever use a specialized mallet like that, or the one that comes to mind for me is Maraca mallets, I would always buy an extra one because I had to use Maraca mallets for a piece and I only bought a pair. And if one of them exploded the day of the concert, I don't know what I was going to do. And I was so fortunate that because I did catch a couple rims every now and then, I was so fortunate they lasted. But yeah, that's a scary thing. And I actually know of a timpanist that had to play the Bernstein symphonic dances, and the day of the concert, his Maraca mallet exploded.
What a disaster.
What do you do at that point? So yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. Yeah.
That's not where the excerpt is, Garrett.
Yeah. I know something.
It's something else.
Well, Garrett, while we're talking about Rebonds, I have kind of 2 questions because it's become such a big staple in our repertoire, right? So many people play it. I wonder, what do you think maybe are the pedagogical values? Like, what do you think is most valuable that students get from studying this piece? And then a second question would be for any of our listeners that haven't played it before, do you have any advice for them on maybe an approach to get started with, or anything to kind of get them thinking in a good direction?
That's a really good question. And I have kind of 2 thoughts. One is from a student perspective, what the student has to gain from it. And the biggest thing, aside from learning a staple in the repertoire, which, will, go on longer than us, is the idea of exploration and pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Impossible is probably my least favorite word, and it has to be when I'm in this art form, especially at this fragile time in our history. But it's really important to not engage that word until you've uncovered all the possible variations. I didn't think the ending of Safa was possible to play as written until I started rearranging the instruments and being like, oh, I can use the X and Y axis to play the ending and just use my mediocre 4-mallet skills. And so ultimately my lessons with Pius paid off and I can play Safa as written. So, and then the second thing is it's a challenge for the teacher to not teach the same way every time. I think, I can't say really we as teachers because I haven't really been a collegiate level teacher that long. I teach at universities and I do master classes, but I don't, I'm still freelance and I teach online. But one thing as a teacher that we should kind of get used to opening ourselves up to is not adopting convention. Silvio Gualda and Steve Schick did an incredible service. Stephen Schick did an incredible service to the percussion community by premiering these pieces. And they laid a lot of the foreground work for us, so we didn't have to try so hard. But we don't do the art a service if we just copy what they do. Like even when I was doing my postdoc with Steve, and he's like, how many sounds can you get? How many pitches can you get out of a snare drum? Can you make the snare drum sound more like a voice? And this idea of, not seeking out what the master has done, but seek out what the master sought. It doesn't stop with Stephen Schick. It continues with all of us. And if we just keep copying what everybody else is doing, we don't help the art form. So we need to, as teachers, teach our students that, hey, I haven't seen this way done. Maybe there's something you can figure out, but just explore this possibility and perhaps that'll lead you to this possibility. I've gone through 4 setups just for Rebonds B alone, and I finally come to a setup that I like. But who knows, maybe in 2 years, I'll come up with something different. We just have to encourage our students to keep challenging boundaries, and we as teachers owe it to the art form to not set limitations based on convention.
You play it really well. It's cool. We've got a lot of people on that. Really, listeners, if you're, and since we're talking about students, Karli's question, when you're looking at how to do this piece, look at Garrett's recordings also. I feel like we're kind of slowly accumulating the ways to do this piece. And just an endorsement from just, my own personal little endorsement. I think, you play this stuff really good.
I appreciate that, but I actually think the message was not to listen to my recording. And in fact, I have a better recording coming out, so please don't listen to the old one.
But you don't quite do it like you're saying, like Steve Schick showed it to us, and instead of just saying like, oh, that's how you do it, let's all do it like that, you're saying no, like let's keep exploring, and you've explored another way. So I guess I'm just saying I think people should include how you approach it in the mix, like your woodblock convention.
That's the next recording. It's coming up. And I talk about it a little bit in the masterclass, how I set up the drums to, actually facilitate the ending a tempo. So a lot of cool. Interesting ground, but still not done. And probably I just have to be open to the fact that someone's going to come along in 15 years and play it better than me. So,
while underage, while in elementary school.
Yeah.
I was just going to add to Garrett's point. Like, one thing that blows my mind is like one day Merlin didn't exist, and then Bill Mersch performed it. One day Velocities didn't exist, and then Lee Howard Stevens performed it. And it's like these are insane pieces compared to anything that had existed before. And most sane human beings, if they were given the score to Safa for the first time and no one had ever played it, they'd probably say like, hey, maybe you could go back and renotate this so I can read it a little better, and then I'll consider playing it. It's like that idea of like what is, like, we don't know what's possible until we completely exhaust the possibilities and then fail it. And I think that's like Steve Schick's whole point with a lot of like Bone Alphabet was not written to be easy. It was written to be that difficult to say, like, why not? So yeah, my hat's off to you, Garrett.
Thank you. Yeah, rewriting pieces like Safa, maybe so they're legible or understandable. Do whatever you want in your own time, but don't show it to anyone. There's a reason that Safa is notated the way it is. If you look at some of the original Xenakis sketches, he's quite literally copying the iambic pentameter of Sappho's poetry. And that's the look that he's trying to go for. And yeah, there are times at the end where I wish the medals were written above the woods, because that's how I facilitated on my setup. But it doesn't mean I'm going to rewrite the whole score just to make it comfortable for me. If the music was comfortable, I wouldn't be playing it.
There's something about that like archaic, ancient language. It makes it seem like mythological. It's like if it was just in traditional notation, it wouldn't be special, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories like the pauses in the middle of Safa are like supposed to be attributed to the untimely death of this great poetess, and you know, it was an untimely death. It doesn't make that story true in the composition. I haven't seen any writing by Xenakis that said that's what it was, but basically the way the piece is laid out is it's the same number of graphic lines for each bar that he's calculated from start to end. And that's what's amazing, is that everything's just kind of mathematically precise, even in Rebonds. I haven't done all the math myself, but I've broken up the golden ratio to be like, oh yeah, the sections are shrinking equally. That's cool. So yeah, that's always interesting.
I just wanted to mention one name really quickly, and I was trying to look this up before I said it out loud so I could make sure I was correct. Yes, I am. Okay, good. I just a percussion literature name that a lot of younger viewers might not be aware of is Silvio Gualda, who he was French, right? Percussionist that worked quite a bit with Xenakis and was responsible for premiering a lot of these Xenakis works. So yeah, go look up Silvio Gualda. I think he's still living, as far as I know.
He's in his early, his early 80s. I think he's 81, living in Paris, and I still think he played with the Paris Opera.
Yeah, I had a friend that I know was working on maybe a dissertation or something, and I actually got in touch and asked him some questions. So, but yeah, that's a name. It's not a household name for most people, like Steve Schick. One to look up for sure.
It's very interesting because in Europe he is very much a household name. Steve has done a really good job of being global, a global staple, and Silvio Gualda, he is a name that you're in Europe, you're in Germany, you're in France, you're in Holland. Oh, I know that name, but maybe he's not crossing the pond as quickly as Steve is. I don't know how Steve has the energy to do some of the rep he does, and it's just healthy in body, spirit, and mind. And I think that's key for him to be able to do what he's doing, and memorizing this repertoire when it was unheard of. So
yeah, he's very special.
Well, Karli, I think you had something you wanted to share with us today about movement and percussion, which Garrett wrote a thesis or dissertation or something like that on. So, Karli, what do you have for us today?
You found it.
This is your second defense, Garrett.
I'm not sure I have.
Well, Garrett, I enjoyed reading your dissertation. It delves into different aspects of movement and how it applies to percussion playing. And in your introduction, you talk about how you've noticed before a sonic and visual kind of disconnect in live performance. I would say when what's visually happening or physically happening on stage maybe doesn't seem to line up with what we're hearing, which I'm sure we've all seen from time to time. And when you mentioned this, it made me think of Mauricio Kagel, and he has this sort of manifesto. He wants to bring back the visual aspect of performance from what I think he perceived in the 70s to be like an impending dominance of audio recording and everybody purely listening to music rather than experiencing it live as a cohesive art form. So for anybody that's not familiar with this, what Kagel wrote back, I think this was in the 70s, he wrote, "Music has been a scenic event for a long time. In the 19th century, people still enjoyed music also with their eyes, with all of their senses. Only with the increasing dominance of the mechanical reproduction of music through broadcasting and records was this reduced to the purely acoustic dimension. What I want is to bring the audience back to an enjoyment of music with all senses. That's why my music is a direct, exaggerated protest against the mechanical reproduction of music. My goal is a rehumanization of music making. And ever since I first read this when I was working on dressur for the first time, and also when I was working on my dissertation, I just love this quote and this kind of concept. This is what speaks to me about theatrical percussion, especially is the way that, you know, it's an experience you just have to have live. So a lot of percussionists know Kagel, I think, through his work dressur, which is probably the most performed percussion work of his. And we've talked about this before on the podcast. For anyone that's not familiar with it, dressur is a half-hour-long theatrical work for a percussion trio, and it's written for all instruments that are made of wood, and also a set of, you know, furniture, tables, and things that are also made of wood. And then in the center of the set, there's this circular wooden platform that's kind of reminiscent of a circus ring. And in some ways, the entire piece can kind of be interpreted as a comparison between conservatory training and circus training for animals, which is just, that's a whole other thing. But dressur translates from German to English as dressage, which is a type of horseback riding. And I actually just read this definition today. I hadn't read this when I performed the piece last, but the International Equestrian Federation describes dressage as the highest expression of horse training, where horse and rider are expected to perform from memory a series of predetermined movements, which I thought was fascinating. Like, that's kind of exactly what we're asked to do in performing dressur, and a lot of times as musicians even.
I've heard it described as horse ballet, which is kind of the same thing, but yeah.
Right. Well, and I thought it was so interesting. Like, this was from their website, International Equestrian Federation. It had nothing to do with music or Kagel or anything. It was just like, wow, okay, I get it. So for anyone who's ever seen or studied or of course performed this piece, you know that the predetermined movements in dressur are at times like super complicated. There's even an indication in the score in the last marimba passage of the piece, and Kagel writes, "From here, wrong notes are almost inevitable." And I can tell you, having performed this part several times, that wrong notes are actually definitely inevitable in this passage if you're playing them, I think, with the impact that he wants. But really the notes in this passage and a lot of the musical content throughout the whole piece is written, I think, to like serve the movement rather than what we normally experience as musicians, where the movement serves the music. So it's kind of an interesting relationship there. So I have a couple of thoughts on this. I was wondering, as I was reading all this and thinking, revisiting this piece, I wonder what Kagel would think about these times, these very unique times when nobody can experience music live, and the kind of technology we're all using to share and experience music now, where we're, you know, listening and watching recordings. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I think that we had a fellow named Michael Schultz on the show a long time ago. Ben, you're the only one in the room who's gonna remember this, but he's that cognitive scientist. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but he's in like teaches in Canada, the recital hall that has every chair in the audience is hooked up to like pulse readers, and they can study they can get all the senses of the audience, and they can do like studies on musical experience in a concert stage. And before he got that job, I mean, he, in my mind, proved that we listen with our eyes as well as our ears. And he said, yeah, you don't, he said it so well. And it was something like, you don't hear with your eyes, but you interpret sound with your eyes after the fact. Like, you don't hear with your ears either. You hear in your brain. So, for instance, if a note is long or short and you're seeing and hearing, you will in fact interpret this as a long note, not through your ears, but through your eyes. So you will, in fact, it will change how you hear it differently. And it's proven, I mean, in my mind, this debate is over. I thought it was really, really cool. Yeah, it's all online. Look him up. You can read. You can see the whole demonstration. All right, Ben, what do you got?
Mic drop over.
So
But
to be clear, it's something I think all of us struggle with so much, because I so totally, completely buy into like the whole complete listening experience with a visual aspect as well. And I read Garrett's paper as well, and it was enlightening. And I love Evelyn Glennie, and on her podcast episode, I specifically brought up the way that she's able to present music.
Mhm.
But as much as I love Evelyn Glennie, I also I adore Glenn Gould, who, and I'm not saying one's better than the other, they're completely different people, obviously, but Glenn Gould thought that performance, and this is maybe sort of what Kagel was addressing, but he thought that live performance was this sort of spectacle where you're putting like a monkey up on stage. And he said that it felt, instead of like you were going to enjoy a performance, it felt like you were going to try and catch errors that a human being would make on stage, which he completely hated. And Glenn Gould, much like the Beatles, stopped performing. He didn't perform. And for such a legendary musician that everyone knows, to not actually really have a performance career after a certain point, and he exclusively recorded. And he said that like recordings were the truest expression of music, because I mean, you could just get it you could edit it down to the point where it's absolutely perfect. And so we're left with this very, very strange dichotomy that and I think the answer is we don't have to answer it. But yeah, it's
Sure.
a very strange thing that we have the Glenn Gould side of things, which is wonderful. And if you haven't listened to his recording of the Goldberg Variations, stop listening to this podcast right now, and we'll see you in an hour. But at the same rate, I think it's I love rock and roll. I love going to see Paul McCartney play live. Like, there's nothing like experiencing a concert live. So I don't know. That's my 2 cents on it. I've talked for too long, and we're actually starting to even get off the topic of motion and music. But that's my.
I'll bring it back a little if you don't mind.
Go for it, Garrett, please.
So there's 2 sides to that, and I'm kind of in the middle, because to say that you need to see something to enjoy a musical experience, like, of course, I appreciate that Kagel wants to do that, and it gets us more performances too. Puts us in the concert hall, and people don't have to just go on YouTube to see what's online. But to say that someone who's blind can't fully enjoy a musical experience because they can't see, I think is wrong.
Yeah, no one's saying that.
And no one's saying that.
Man.
But at the same time, I, of course, am very much into how movement is cohesive with music. And I want to write a sequel to my dissertation topic, because all I did in my dissertation was talk about repertoire that is not inherently theatrical or requires movement to be musically on par. But I do think there is something valuable to both sides of the experience, being able to provide something that's aurally stimulating as well as visually stimulating. You want to be able to communicate on both sides of the coin, because that's essentially what a music performance is. It's a double-sided coin. It's a coin. Coins are double-sided. That was stupid. Most of the time they are, unless they're the pennies that people are trying to sneak out of the treasury. But
I think we're looking for double-edged sword. I think it's the.
I meant coin.
It's also that.
Yeah.
But
no weapons in here.
I just wanted to mention that reading Garrett's dissertation, I think it's not rocket science to think that most percussionists have at some point thought about the visual aspect of what they're doing, especially people that do like drum corps sort of things, which I don't think is anyone here. But I wanted to mention that the thing I found so wonderful about Garrett's dissertation, and you were building on the work of others, is that you actually provided like a system of how to describe like an analytical system, a framework to work within. And also, I just wanted to mention that Michael Colgrass, in one of his books, I think I can't remember which one it is, but Michael Colgrass talks about this idea of like viewing a performance on mute. And it was so funny because Ksenia posted a recording of the Bach G major prelude a few days ago, and it just popped up on Facebook, and I was just enthralled by watching it. And I actually commented on it, like, it sounds so good even on mute. And then I read Garrett's dissertation, and he brought up the exact example of playing the G major prelude and watching it. So yeah, that was a cool little coincidence.
Anyway, I really thought that was an offense because it probably sounds way better when you don't listen to it. But I had
Oh.
2 points.
Ouch.
Ouch! I know, I self-flagellate a lot.
Self-burn.
I thought one of the brilliant things that you mentioned in your dissertation, Garrett, was besides what Promil told you, go and listen to yourself on mute, was the part when you asked your students to hold a kick drum over their heads, and then ask them a series of regular questions to just prove to them that their brain will struggle because it's physically tense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To answer regular questions, and then to sort of prove a point of like, hey, if you relieved all this tension before playing and asking a player to play with their like jaw relaxed for a full week. I actually did that this past week. I was like, I do have a lot of tension in my jaw. Let me drool over the marimba while I play and relax, and it really helps. So I thought that was brilliant. But I wanted to turn the discussion around a little bit if possible. I'm finishing up Steve Schick's book, The Percussionist's Art. And in one of the sections, in one of the chapters, Face the Music, he says, I have found that movements extraneous to the requirements of sound production usually seem false, if not pretentious. And there's this other side of the coin, especially with the pretentiousness. I feel like, when we see people shooting from way overhead, some of us, I'm not saying anyone's in the room, but maybe we are. We think it might be pretentious. So what do you think? Where is that fine line between being, balletic, like just tasteful, and going crazy?
Of course. So with the dissertation, did you guys also see the video that goes with it?
No.
Because
there was a video.
The dissertation
yeah.
There's a video that goes with it. Maybe I should put it on YouTube for free or something.
Yeah, please.
I just have to ask the people in it for their permission. But what I end with, and I hope I ended with this in the dissertation or touched on it in some way, is that the movement isn't premeditated. The word is appropriated. And the whole point is not to prepare or to choreograph movement. The whole point is to make sure that you're not making motions that would inhibit the musicality that you're trying to communicate to the audience. And I talked with Steve Schick about this when I was working on Speaking Drums by Peter Utbush, which is going to be on my upcoming album. And the whole album is music for solo vocalizing percussionists. And he's like, you know what? I just want to tell you before you play this piece that I really hate this piece. And that was great. And then I played it for him. And he said, I can't be sure if I like it or not, but it's definitely the best version I've heard, which was great because I was messing up all over the place. And that was great to hear from Steve. He was basically talking about how people fight to exaggerate these small theatrical episodes in music that speaks for itself. I think there is a limit to which we can quote unquote choreograph or premeditate. And the whole point is to just make sure that everything's appropriated. Film yourself without the audio, and then if you're doing something wrong, my dissertation is meant to give you a vocabulary and examples from Stanislavski's acting methods to conquer those parts of the piece that are inhibiting the musical elements from being communicated visually. And so it's been a while since I've been with my 25 or 30 page dissertation, and I just watched the video recently because now I'm applying for collegiate jobs, and I thought that would be a good thing to send. But the important thing is that people are able to analyze their own movement. And the easiest way to do that, people, is film yourself every single time. So that's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Isn't it? How do we train students to look good? Because everyone can tell. Everyone can tell when you're faking it. Everyone can tell when you don't mean it.
I mean, I'm the worst person to ask because I don't think I look good when I play. But I think looking appropriate was the word I used in my dissertation. Just appropriate.
Well, appropriated is good, I think.
Yeah.
But this is like so hard because we've always had that. I mean, we see students and professionals who they play so well, but they just look stiff and they look dull. And I mean, we know for a fact that a lot of people are coming to see the performer, not the piece.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so a huge majority of the audience is not even interested in the piece. They're interested in what the piece does to bring out something in the performer. And when I'm seeing Beethoven Fifth for the 12th time live, I'm not interested in hearing it nailed it again, yet again, played perfectly again. I'm interested in seeing, like, man, what does this great piece of music do to set off these musicians? You know, what does it bring out in this conductor? So it's a weird thing to teach, you know. It's so tricky.
But it's the same way I would teach any piece of music, regardless of the regardless of the movement, just the musical factors. Is even these movement option things are meant to give people options for analyzing what's appropriate for them, because not everybody's body is the same. Not everybody can pull off this eyes closed, scarf on neck, marimba thing.
Exactly.
I tried it when I was in Taiwan. It just didn't work for me. That, and it was 96 degrees outside.
You're exactly right. Like you can't. People will know if it's fake. So if you just say, "Oh,
everybody go be Pius," or "Everybody go be Casey," sometimes you just have to find your own voice, and that's really what I think being a teacher is going to become about. Is not teaching percussion, but directing in a way that gives people more options to find their own genuine voice in music.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, I guess the key for me is that whatever movement or whatever elements you bring to the piece, it just has to be authentic. It has to be organic, and it has to come from within the performer. And if it doesn't, like, say if you're moving in a certain way because somebody told you to, then it's probably going to look strange, Yeah.
Well, I guess that's what I mean, because I've said that exact thing to people, and they say, "Cool, how do I do that?" And I'm like, "Dude, it's gonna take a while." I mean, I have my own theory on how to get someone there, but it's like a multiple year long. I mean, it's many years,
But this also plays into what Kagel was talking about, and how live media has kind of inhibited not only the performance of music, but also the preparation of music, because they see the most performed video on YouTube of Rebonds and say, wow, if that's the most positive reviewed, most viewed video, it must be the best interpretation. Or this person is the best selling, percussion album, so he must be the best percussionist, right? And everybody trains to be that person, when really the best way to be the musician you want to be is to find the best way to be yourself. And I could say this over and over again, but it's really just, it is kind of sad how the negative components of promoting music have defaulted our education system too, because even teachers, if they don't know the repertoire, they defer to videos to learn it before a lesson or something. I mean, even I am guilty of this. If I don't know a marimba solo, I'll watch someone play it and think it has to be that way. And then I'll look at the score and be like, oh, wait, no, it doesn't go like that.
The MIDI recording is even worse. Like when like, how's this piece go? And you listen to the MIDI, then you start, and it's like, oh god, no, we all do it, but it's terrible.
Hot brains, yeah, exactly.
Karli, get us back on track.
Yeah, let's get back to this. Garrett, one other part of your dissertation that I found to be particularly compelling is your study in the application of the Laban movement analysis, which I've never studied before. So I was reading up on it. It's based on the research and work of Rudolf Laban, and it's basically kind of a language for describing and understanding aspects of human movement. Is that how you would describe it?
More or less. I mean, I can't really say that that's not what it is. But basically what it is, it's a way for, and it doesn't have to be human movement. It's primarily used for human movement. But it's basically a developed vocabulary and system of exercises for achieving movement appropriated to dance, to acting. And I decided to apply it to a percussive context. The original concept for my dissertation was to do it for all of music. And the problem with that is I'd have to research how clarinets respond to movements, even though they're inhibited by having their instrument connected to them, or how violinists are inhibited by only having the bow as something that's the only thing that could punch outward, for example, with their elbow, but then their left hand, or if you're right-handed, if you're a right-handed finger on violin, which I haven't seen yet, but there are, they're gliding and sliding. So that was interesting to me, but it was also going to be like a 150-page dissertation if I decided to apply it to all instruments. It was just easier to keep it at a percussion, a percussive grasp, and then it was only a 30-page or so dissertation. So yeah.
Right.
It's cool. It's cool you mentioned a violinist or a clarinetist, because we've heard complaints like, oh, percussion's difficult because you're not truly connected to your instrument. But Laban and this whole it's a notation system, but also a philosophy, and it applies to like a multi-percussion so well, because you are free. Like you have control of all those movements. You can glide, slide, punch. You can do all the efforts, which I can explain whenever we're ready for it. But you can do all those things, and you're not attached to an instrument. So it's kind of
cool.
One
of my experiments, because I was originally preparing to do it for all instruments, is I had a violinist play 6 elegies, which is originally for marimba. And there's a theatrical section where you actually have to dance away from the marimba. And they were holding the violin in their hand, and I just could not stop laughing, because it was just like, it's like, play this violin. And they got the violin and the bow in their hand, and I was just like, okay, I can't do this anymore. It's just so funny. Yeah.
I was going to say, I remember seeing Brian Calhoun do a masterclass years ago at this point, but he talked about how almost every instrument you actually hold when you play it. You hold a trumpet, you hold a clarinet, you hold a violin. And he said even the ones that you don't hold, like piano or harp, you're still touching, you're still in contact with the instrument. And he said that, percussionists, we're at a disadvantage because not only are we not holding our instrument, but we're actually it's almost like we're germaphobes, like we're afraid to touch it. So we have sticks to separate us from the instrument. But at the same rate, it does, it's interesting. I've never thought of it, it frees your body up to move in certain ways. But it was, I've used the word enlightening a couple times before probably already, but reading Garrett's dissertation, there is a marimba player who I know, and I will not mention his or her name for obvious reasons, and I've never said this out loud, but I absolutely cannot stand watching this person play. And I finally figured out why. No, it's not Xenia. No, I finally figured out why, and it was because of the way that this person moves his or her feet when they play. They're not in contact with the ground. They're always rising up. And it's like, go down. That's it.
Descend.
Yeah, exactly. But I was so glad to actually finally, literally after years of not enjoying this person's performance, who I like this person very much personally, but to be able to actually put into words what it is I don't like.
Yeah, I really need to put this video up, because I actually do talk about how our movement is not a direct influence on the instrument, but it is first an influence on the implement which is used to contact the instrument. And it's almost like percussionists were built for COVID-19, because we already have our own mallets that we have sanitized ourselves, and we don't even have to touch an instrument that everybody has sneezed on. But at the same time, that it's really a kind of like a 3-step process. You create the movement, you put your mallets in your hand, and you make sure your mallets respond to that movement. And then third, you make sure the mallets are musically in contact with the instrument appropriately.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You should teach that to this least. Yeah, you should teach that to this Ben's least favorite marimbist, whoever that is, and it's not me.
Yeah, I would say it's almost more dangerous not to say who it is, because now people are speculating, making wild speculations.
I don't even know who you're talking about.
It's no one anyone here would know.
I'm off the hook for this
Sure.
one. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, well, I was gonna just tag on back up just a little bit for everyone and explain a little bit about what Laban notation and the whole theory kind of thing is. So I thought I would start just by saying, check this out real quick. Oh, that's the fire I was talking about. I forgot to screen share that. That's the fire from the news.
Oh, that's so sad.
Wow.
Oh, I know, but look at that. It's a huge fire.
Look at all
Yeah,
the
I
music we
screenshot it
lost.
here. So here is from
I'm
when
sure
the fire
people got hurt too.
firefighters removed the canisters from Universal Studios and way back in 2008. Of course, it was a big publicized thing, but what they left out, and it took all the way till 2019 to include how many music master recordings were missed. So anyway, but that's from the coverage back in 2008. But we're not talking about that anymore. We're supposed to be talking about Laban notation and movement. So there's some pretty cool explanations of what are called the 8 efforts in Laban movement. And I'm going to just give some credit here to Analivia Corderio. She has a nice video where it's really fun, actually. Look her up on YouTube. She demonstrates the movement. She has a whole little mini documentary on the whole Laban kind of philosophy. And yeah, she demonstrates the efforts towards the end. And then she also has her son, I assume, demonstrating the efforts also with just like regular daily gestures, which is really cool. So I kind of tried to screenshot it right where it was kind of mid gesture, where you might be able to imagine how it is. I've learned what these all are. I could demonstrate them with like my hand here in front of the camera, but I think it's better to give credit. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see some screenshots here. But they kind of have these categories, and this one's called glide, and it's sort of like you can imagine, like just imagine you slide your hand from point A to point B in a straight line, and you do it kind of delicately. That means the weight is light because you're going to do it with like a touch and a soft glide. The time is sustained because it's slow in general, and the space is direct, meaning you're going from point A to point B. And Garrett, I'm new to all this, so jump in and correct me like anytime, please. This is not.
You're doing great. It's great to hear other people talk with this terminology. That's awesome.
Cool. Yeah. Good.
I'm just gonna let you keep talking. Yeah.
Okay.
DMA.
Like sincerely, like chime in anytime. So that one's called glide, and one that is just subtly different is called float. And I don't know if you all can see me here. Can you still see me with my screen sharing?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, you can? Great. So float is sort of like glide would be like this, just like point A to point B. Float is almost the same thing, except the space is called flexible. So you do the same kind of motion, except you kind of do it almost at will. You do it like where you want to. So that one's called float. The weight is light, the time sustained, and the space is flexible. Press is sort of like you would imagine. Your weight is strong, the time is sustained, and the space is direct. So it's basically like glide, except with like tension and with strength. So it's like pushing. Very liquid versus thick dough, I would say. Ring, this one's a little confusing to me, but it's a twisting. And I believe it's in her video. She shows her son twisting something apart. So, I mean, these names are not meant to be super technical or confusing. Dab is one of them. So I'm gonna cruise through all of them. I'm not gonna demonstrate each and every one. But dab, the weight light, the time sudden, the space direct. Flick, just like you would think, it's like these sudden little small bursts of movement that are kind of not any connected joints. Like every joint is kind of represented in flick. So if you're gonna flick from the elbow, it's like that. You flick from the elbow, then from the wrist. Those are all flicks.
These photos are really weird for the terminology, actually.
Well, I did my best, and they're screenshots from a video.
Oh, okay.
So
I thought this was her document or something.
Yeah, I was kind of limited in what I could show because the text only showed up at a certain point in the video, so I didn't have a thousand options. But yeah, I kind of threw it together a little quick. Thrust is sometimes also called punch, and it's these big, strong bursts of energy. There's also slash, and I move on just a little bit. Guess what this is, Ben? This is a question for you. What is this?
I'm gonna go ahead and say that that's aphasia. And
yeah, how the heck did you know
Cool.
that?
P-turn.
It says Centurion greeting.
Centurion greeting.
There you go.
Just with that, yeah.
Yeah, well done, Karli and Ben. 2 points for each of you. Ksenia, -1 point.
Sniff grapefruit.
Bias. Horrible. Fine.
The rules aren't spelled out very clearly, but yeah, this is a dissertation actually that I got to be a part of some years ago. Kyle Maxwell. Let's see, here it is. Let me make sure I get Kyle's name.
I've seen this before.
You've seen this? Okay, yeah, Doherty. No, I always want to say like Daughtry or Doherty, like the composer. But yeah, Kyle Daughtry. He did this cool, Kyle Doherty did this cool dissertation sort of all about, and I've mentioned it briefly on the show before, but just about how, we have all these visual pieces nowadays, like aphasia, and we always invent our own system of notation. Here's a little aphasia. And there's actually here's a piece of mine that he also translated to Laban notation. Yeah, Garrett, you know this piece.
Yeah, lots of dab and flick in that one.
Yeah, lots of dab and flick. That's right. So he translated these pieces and showed, hey, there's already a perfectly useful notation out there called Laban notation, and you can be as specific as Mark Applebaum's bad touch, but you can also, Mark Applebaum's aphasia and Casey's bad touch. You can be that specific. But so that's cool. The language already exists, but also you can communicate with dancers on this level now. So all of a sudden, maybe there's this expansion for possible collaboration. So neat idea that Kyle did. And let's see, so that is aphasia. Y'all guessed it. And here's just a brief little summary of the basics of Laban notation and just like what it looks like. There are symbols like the solid square is the center of your body and you're standing still. And then if you see this right here, well, it means you're going to move forward, directly, straight. Here, the opposite means you're going to move backwards. So on and so forth. It gets really complex, the notations, and it looks like graphic score notation. I mean, it looks like the stuff we see when we're doing Terry DeMay, or we're doing Zyklus, or we're doing aphasia. I mean, it does look like just another piece for us. So anyway, just a quick little summary of this really cool thing that Garrett knows a lot about called Laban notation. Give me a grade, Garrett. How'd I do?
You did a great job. And,
Yeah.
I was looking at Kyle's publication when I was doing my research because I wanted to see if anyone had done it. And I guess the whole point of my project was to apply it to non-theatrical works. And he had applied it just to works that are inherently theatrical or added movement. But I also coached a piece that Cameron Leach performs, Ceci n'est pas un bal. And I coached the trio version of it. And two of my students who had done my dissertation project with me were in it. And also one of the percussionists was a hip hop dancer. So it was very interesting to have someone with a dance background jump in with two students who had just gotten an introductory course into Laban terminology. So that was very interesting. I think the video is up on YouTube somewhere. I have one I send to universities for teaching examples, but something I did at UW-Madison when I was there.
That's cool. Well, one thing I would add, and I tried to keep this all pretty concise and not say too much, but Rudolf Laban is neat, is a deep rabbit hole. He's connected to Ballet Russe and Diaghilev, which means he's connected to Stravinsky. So a lot of those ballets, there's Laban documentation too. I'm not sure it's something like dancers are universally big on. It's certainly not something that it's not like the equivalent of our notation. Like, I'm not sure any dancer would just like go like, oh yeah, blah blah notation. We totally cover that. We totally know that. Tell me if you think differently, Garrett, for sure. But I think it's more about just preserving these dances and being able to explain his broader philosophy. And you're going to need a notation to be able to like describe that. You know, because you can definitely find it out there. You can definitely find description, but I mean, it's nothing like, you know, it's not like, oh, here's the original Swan Lake, and each dancer gets their part in Laban notation. Like, I don't know if that's ever happened, you know.
Yeah, I mean, at UW-Madison, the Laban class was actually required for dance majors.
Okay.
And the instructor there, Andrea Harris, who I was working with, great dancer, used it a lot in her hip hop classes and her contemporary dance classes. So I can't say whether this is a staple in major dance programs and conservatories all over the world. I did see it used at the collegiate level. So
certainly, and I've certainly seen it there too. I'm curious to know how pervasive it really is. But back to that little rabbit hole idea, man. Like, you know, I read somewhere Laban created choreography for Hitler's armies to make them look foolish, like to make them look stupid for people who understand gesture and notation, and not notation, dance notation and choreography, and it's just cool. It's like, shoot, this is a cool rabbit hole if you want to go down it. It sounds like
I didn't even go down that rabbit hole, and I had no clue about that. My understanding was that he moved to Switzerland even before Hitler had a semblance of what would have been called an army. At that time, I think it was more of an armed gang.
You might be right, yeah.
And then he migrated, but that would be kind of funny way to stick it to the man, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, it sounded pretty speculative. It sounded like they were not absolutely sure about this. I mean, it had a Shostakovich kind of air about it. Like, inside my art, I'm gonna fool the person who hired me to write for them. You know, and I'm gonna make a fool out of the person who I disagree with. It definitely had that air about it. But it sounds like we're not certain. So anyway, that's a rabbit hole.
They didn't need Rudolf Laban's help. They did it themselves. I mean, but years later, for us to realize it, for sure.
Sure.
I was just going to add one other little, I don't know, interesting thing to me is that I think the idea of like we could write all these theatrical percussion pieces in the same notation is appealing, but it harkens back to a long time ago on the podcast. We talked about the earliest recordings. Someone developed a system of recording, but there was no system of playback. And so what is a recording without playback? And so it's
I reported on that.
Yeah, it's like, so with like a notation system, if you develop the greatest notation system in the world, but we don't study it, we don't learn it, then like whatever Casey came up with to notate bad touch is probably actually a lot easier for me to pick up and learn than a piece in proper Laban notation. I don't know, just an interesting thought from me.
Sure. And, for me and the students I was teaching, that was a realization that we would be wasting time teaching them Laban notation instead of just learning the vocabulary, which they needed to analyze their movement. Because Laban notation in itself is a deep rabbit hole. So nothing really more to say about that. It was really just a way to take what I liked and saw valuable to the percussion community, and also in combination with the Stanislavski acting studies, gave students some pedagogical methods for critiquing movement of their own and for their students or their colleagues. And I also made up my own exercises based on my studies with Peter Prommel, and just came up with some exercises on the fly as well about how to read like classical music, the Bach Prelude was one of those things with Peter, but then also like when you see an indication in a Baroque or classical piece of music, what does the term allegro actually encompass? How does that apply to music? So getting students to think about that instead of allegro just means fast. It's like, no, what does allegro mean for you in terms of how you move on the instrument and how you engage? So stuff like that.
Cool.
You are ready to take over a college job. We see it already. You know what it's about.
See.
You don't want it, dude. I just finished Caleb's dissertation. I'm busted. I'm beat.
Okay, I'll take your job.
You can have it.
All the music you sell.
You can have all that too. That's the deal. If you take my job, you have to do the side business also.
Okay, that's why no one's taking your job.
Casey, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, and if you do, you can certainly edit it out. But I had a conversation with Casey a while back, and he was saying that, like, when you make money off of selling music, it's unfortunate you have to pay taxes on it. And he was saying everyone tells him, well, buy a new printer. If you buy a new printer, then it's a tax write-off. You don't have to pay taxes on that portion. He's like, yeah, but the whole point of my side gig here isn't to buy more printers. It's to maybe make a little bit of money.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know if you. No, I don't mind you sharing that at all. I mean, episodes ago,
how many printers are you up to now?
I don't print at home on the regular anymore. I had to go to other sources. But that is like such a good point. Like, we often think, okay, finances for musicians must be this like totally different art form and like this totally different thing. And like, dude, it's not. Like, you can write off your expenses, and that's kind of where it ends. Like, you figure out what your expenses are, keep track of them in case you get audited. And other than that, you just need to like save and be smart with money. But yeah, I think the specific comment Ben's referring back to is musicians often go like, oh, I have a gig, I'll fly first class. It's a tax write-off. It's like, dude, it's not a dollar for dollar tax write-off. You should take the cheapest flight you possibly can. It's not, you will save a little money by writing it off, but you will gain much more just by straight up saving money. I mean, it's such a simple thing.
Amen.
I'm so bad at saving money.
Finance
I need to get better at it.
Just don't spend money. Like, just I know we're going way off topic here, but like, yeah, just like,
it's
don't
important to talk about. I'm starting to realize how important it is. It's just, and actually right now I'm starting to realize how much more money I can accumulate. We can't go out to eat food. So I'm like, wait, I really have this much money in my bank account after teaching for just like 2 weeks,
Yeah.
Just stop eating.
Yeah, and then if I just stop eating, then it's totally solved. I don't even have to get a collegiate teaching job.
No, nobody needs that. Just know, like, okay, I spent $100 on woodblock making material, but that does not mean that will save you $100 in paying tax.
No.
It means it to be a small percentage of that $100 that you won't have to pay.
15%,
yeah, for sure.
Probably.
Definitely.
Buy bigger wood blocks, save more money.
Yeah. Well, for me, like, I've been making the Rebonds blocks for years. I think I've made like probably around 30 sets for people. Not with this glissando version. I think, hopefully I'll get more orders after more people see my masterclass. But also I'm starting to make what I call bougie boobams. So, because a lot of people buy these like Kohlberg boobams, and this isn't a shot at Kohlberg because they're actually really good products. But I wanted to make something accessible to people in the US who don't want to pay that VAT, or who, don't want to pay 300 euros for an octave of boobam. So yeah. I'm working on a set right now for a Atlanta-based percussionist. And I don't know if it was a joke, but I'm hoping it wasn't. Like, Josh Quillen hit me up on Facebook saying I'm saving up for your boobams. So hopefully I can sell a couple sets to So Percussion. That would be awesome. But yeah, no, it's really important for me to buy a lot of these materials in bulk, because then I get more money for my investment. And when I write off my taxes later, I don't have recurring purchases for wood. It's really important to just get things before you even need them. But before that, you need money to get things. So
sure.
It's
Well,
hard.
say the big thing
Here,
is like
here's your get that wood joke, Casey.
the big lesson here is like if you have a chance to save money, do it. Like don't buy a first class ticket to travel just because you think it's a tax write-off. It's not a dollar for dollar tax write-off, or it's not a dollar for dollar saved. Anyway, I'm not telling you this, Garrett. I know you know this. I'm telling this to youngins. Okay, Ben, fine.
Well, on
go.
that note, thanks so much.
Ben's been trying to end the episode for like
Episode
20
over.
minutes.
Now, thanks so much to Garrett for joining us today, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Let's talk a little longer. I don't want to.
We can end it there if you want.